G'day, here are the highlights and the lowlights of the 2025 season in 10 minutes. I attended all F1 races this year and it kicked off in Australia with a wet weather race and so much action. Isaac Hadjar crashing right in front of me before the race even started. Australian driver Jack Doohan lasted less than 6 laps before he crashed out. Carlos was out on lap 2, Alonso on lap 34. Oscar spun on lap 44, effectively putting paid to his chance of a podium finish, and Liam Lawson out on lap 47. This left Lando Norris claiming the first podium of the year in Melbourne. Round 2 saw us in China, and remarkably both Ferraris disqualified post-race. And they weren't the only ones. Pierre Gasly was also disqualified. For Ferrari, it was the start of a shocking year. Liam Lawson also performed poorly in that race, and Oscar Piastri won his 3rd race of his career. In Japan, we saw Liam and Yuki swap places. Liam, just given 2 races with Red Bull to prove himself, wasn't good enough, and neither was Jack Doohan when he crashed at turn 1. For him, he went in there flat out with the DRS open, put him into the wall at a frightening speed. Carlos Sainz fined €20,000 for being late to the national anthem because he had a stomach upset. That created a lot of furor amongst fans. But in the end, it was Max Verstappen taking his first win in 9 months in front of an enthusiastic Japanese crowd. Round 4 saw us in Bahrain, and there was very little to talk about except for Oscar Piastri's 4th win of his career in front of George Russell and Lando Norris. Now, I did a predictions video before the season started, and shortly I'll tell you how I fared against the actual results. Round 5 saw us in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and 2 of my biggest posts of the year took place here, and both involved drivers' girlfriends. Kicked it off with Kimi Antonelli giving his girlfriend Aliska a hug on the way in, and then a rare display of affection as Carlos Sainz kissed Rebecca just for my camera on the way into the track. Lando Norris's crash in Q3 meant that he started P10 for the race, and this was the final podium. And Sebastian Vettel popped up just prior to that race weekend, joining a whole lot of young women out at a go-kart track in Jeddah to promote women in sport in the region. Now, thanks to Bitdefender for sponsoring this video. After having travelled to every F1 race, I'm finally home. But that doesn't mean I can overlook my online safety. Cyber attacks can happen anytime, anywhere. I may be spending a little less time on my devices now that the F1 season's over, but that doesn't mean I'm not at risk. That's why I use Bitdefender. Bitdefender's premium security not only provides advanced threat defense, but also a secure password manager, email protection, and unlimited VPN. So whether I'm on the road or relaxing at home, I know I'm in good hands when it comes to online safety. If I'm unsure about something, for instance if I receive a link or a message that seems a little suspicious, Bitdefender's AI-run chatbot scam protection can help me out in seconds. I just copy and paste into the chat and it checks it out for me. Tap the link in the description to find out more and take advantage of Bitdefender's free 90-day trial. The first of 3 races was round 6 in the USA at Miami. This would turn out to be Jack Doohan's final race. He was actually aware that he would only be doing 6 races early in the season, and the remarkable thing was his manager was Flavio Briatore, who put him into that seat at Alpine. But Flavio also had an interest in Franco Colapinto. In the end, it turned out a better deal for Franco than it did for Jack. This was also the race that we found out that Max Verstappen was a dad. There was great interest in Max when he arrived into the track for the first time. And do you remember the drivers' parade? Yes, Lego cars. What a marvellous idea this was, and it wouldn't be the only time we'd see drivers in Lego cars. But come the end of the race weekend, it was Oscar Piastri on top with a hat-trick of wins for season 2025. Imola was the venue for round 7, but just after the previous race, the Alpine team principal, Ollie Oakes, mysteriously resigned, headed straight to Dubai, but he was back in Imola with his F2 team, Hi-Tech. I caught up with him there for a quick chat. It was an interesting scenario for sure, and I don't think we've heard the end of that. I believe there's more to that story, and we'll probably find out in the next few months. But just prior to race weekend, Max Verstappen took to the track in Germany, the Nordschleife, as Franz Hermann. It was huge on social media. He was driving a Ferrari 296 GT3 and is said to have beaten the track record for a GT3 car, although official timing for the day was not made public. But on track, we had Franco Colapinto returning to the sport, replacing Jack Doohan, and having a big crash that race alongside Yuki Tsunoda. And this is what the podium looked like on Sunday night. Round 8 was Monaco, and it is one of my favourite races. I love the spectacle of it. I love the fact that I got to stay on a ship, the Explorer 2. That was pretty special. But just photography-wise for us, it is a dream. And this race was the first time F1 had said every car must stop twice during the race, hoping to make it more exciting. In the end, it made it even more boring. I don't expect to see that back again. And Lando Norris ended up taking the win, and also, like Max Verstappen the week prior, set a track record, although his was in an F1 car on track. This was also the race that we met Maggie, his girlfriend, for the very first time. I posted this picture at the time and mentioned this was Lando's girlfriend, and I can tell you a small percentage of fangirls went absolutely berserk, crying that it wasn't his girlfriend. Stop saying that. Turns out it was his girlfriend, and I knew that, and certainly anyone close to Lando knew that, but some of the girls commenting on that post didn't want that to be the case. Obviously, it would have wrecked their chance of perhaps being a future Mrs. Norris. At Barcelona, Lance Stroll failed to start the race on Sunday. He needed some medical attention on a hand injury. Well, there was much talk about whether that was actually due to a cycling incident or whether it was due to him putting his hand through a wall after a very ordinary qualifying session. Unfortunately, because Lance qualified and then pulled out afterwards, no one could replace him. So Aston Martin raced with only one car at the Spanish Grand Prix. The other major event that Barcelona was noted for was George Russell and Max Verstappen coming together. It cost Max a 10-second penalty, and some would say that was the reason he did not win the championship this year. That was just 1 out of 24 races. And in the end, this was the podium. The 10th round saw us head to Montreal in Canada, and just prior to that race weekend, we saw the preview of the F1 the movie. It would go on to make plenty of money and would turn out to be an amazing promotion for the sport. Looking at the race on Sunday, two things that stuck out for me. One, obviously, Kimi Antonelli getting his first podium, and afterwards it was a great celebration. And on the bad news front, Lando Norris crashed into the back of Oscar Piastri, ruining his chance of points at that race, and luckily not damaging Oscar's car too much. And the podium looked like this. At the Austrian Grand Prix, we had a Qatar Airways sign that was suspended above the track just after turn 1, collapsing after a truck hit it. And at the start of the race, as all the cars headed off on the formation lap, Carlos Sainz couldn't get his car moving. Eventually, he got it started and then had to start the race from pit lane. But that didn't go too well because his car actually caught on fire. That was the end of the race for Carlos. Max and Kimi came together, and Liam Lawson had his best race finish of a 6th position before this final podium. At the biggest event of 2025, that is the British Grand Prix, huge crowds, 500,000 over the 4 days. It was a McLaren battle at the top, with Lando Norris ending up on the podium, winning his home race in front of Oscar Piastri. But it was the 3rd place getter that got plenty of attention, Nico Hulkenberg, his first podium after 239 starts. And while the crowd was going crazy for Lando, they were also lapping up Nico's excitement. At this point, let me go through my predictions that I made at the start of the year compared with the actual results. And you'll see here that I picked the winner, Lando Norris. Yay! But I had Lewis for 2nd. He was 6th. I was close with Max, not too far away with Charles. Kimi around the mark, same with George. A lot of you criticised me for having Fernando 8 and Lance at 15. Turns out I wasn't quite so stupid because Fernando was 10th and Lance was 16th. I was way off the mark with Pierre Gasly, a little ambitious with Oliver Behrman, same with Esteban Ocon. Liam Lawson around the mark. Yuki, I was 4 places off. Isaac Hadjar did better than I predicted. Jack Doohan, well, he was last and only did 6 races. And Nico, Carlos and Alex ended up doing way better than I predicted, and Gabriel Bortoleto wasn't far off what I suggested. How did you do in your predictions? Next up, it was off to Spa, and this was the first weekend that Christian Horner was not at the helm of Red Bull for decades. Prior to the race, the Red Bull board decided that Christian wasn't the right man to head up the team anymore and cut him loose. Yes, it was controversial. There was plenty of talk about it in the media, but Laurent Mekies took over his role and has since flourished. The Hungarian Grand Prix was memorable for a final lap showdown between Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, with Oscar so close but unable to pass Lando. It was a tough pill to swallow for Oscar. Whilst Gabriel Bortoleto finished 6th, he was on top of the world. On the other hand, Lewis Hamilton wasn't going at all well, saying in the press pen afterwards that he was useless. And on the social media front, this was one of my top 5 posts of the year. Onto the Dutch Grand Prix, and a heavy crash for Lance Stroll in FP2 saw his session come to an abrupt end. Lando had an engine malfunction which led to his retirement. Charles Leclerc was stranded at turn 3 for a heck of a long time, providing an amazing photo opportunity for me. But the real big news from this race was Isaac Hadjar's third place finish. The rookie was thrilled, got a little over exuberant and ended up breaking a trophy, which was later replaced. And this was also the weekend where Valtteri Bottas and Checo Perez were announced as the drivers for Cadillac in 2026. Monza was notable for Max Verstappen's win because it would be the first of 6 wins in the final 9 races of the season. This event would also produce one of my most popular social media images, with Charles and Max having to sprint back for the national anthem to avoid being penalised as Carlos Sainz was earlier in the year. Round 17 in Baku will be remembered for having the most red flags in a qualifying session, 6, breaking the previous record of 5 set jointly at the 2022 Imola Grand Prix and the 2024 Sao Paulo Grand Prix. Normally qualifying takes less than an hour, this one took more than 2, but it did give Liam Lawson his best ever qualifying result of 3rd. Race day turned out to be McLaren's worst of the year, with Oscar Piastri crashing out on the first lap and having to sit for most of the race at that turn. And this was the podium, with Carlos Sainz celebrating his first podium finish with Williams. It was a dream result for the Spanish driver, and it wouldn't be his first podium finish this year. At the Singapore Grand Prix, it was mandated that all drivers had to wear a cooling vest because of the extreme heat involved with that race. It didn't bother George Russell, he won, but the incident that got everybody talking was the turn 1 first lap incident when Oscar and Lando touched. Oscar felt hard done by. Lando thought it was just fair racing, but in the end the drivers did enough to clinch the Constructors' Championship for McLaren, and that night there was plenty of celebrations in Singapore from the McLaren team. Round 19 took us to Austin in Texas, and it was a big sprint race weekend with Lando and Oscar crashing out at the exit of turn 1. This played into the hands of Max Verstappen. He won both races over that weekend and further closed the gap in the World Drivers' Championship. One thing that popped up in Austin was the issue about Lando Norris's race engineer putting tape on the wall. You might remember that Red Bull were fined for coming back onto the track after they cleared it. The reason that mechanic was going back on was to tear off the tape that McLaren had put on the wall. Well, the reason that tape was put on there was so Lando could line his car up perfectly. Now, there's nothing wrong with pulling that tape off, and there's nothing wrong with putting it on there. The team was fined for the mechanic coming back onto the track. And did McLaren continue putting tape up on the wall for the rest of the year? Yes. And did Red Bull continue to pull it off? No, it did not. Not as far as I could tell anyway. Liam Lawson surprised a couple of marshals at turn 1. He'd actually come into the pit lane. The marshals had given permission to go out and pick up some debris, but they were slow exiting the track, with Liam rounding turn 1 and being surprised by the sight of 2 of them still on the track. And here are the top 3 from that race. Round 21 in Brazil was a shocker for title contender Oscar Piastri. He ended up crashing out of the sprint on lap 6 and was given a whopping 10-second penalty for a turn 1 incident during the main race with Kimi Antonelli. Many Piastri fans were angry the team didn't protest the decision. They felt the team were happy for it to stand as it favoured Lando. The Las Vegas Grand Prix was sensational for a couple of incidents. A manhole cover coming loose and causing disruption to the FP2 session, but more spectacularly, both of the McLaren drivers were disqualified after the skid blocks on both cars had found to have developed excessive wear. It was a sensational end to an interesting race. And with Max winning, he kept his chances of a 5th world title well and truly alive. At the penultimate race in Qatar, Oscar was heading towards a win when a poor strategy call to stay out when the safety car was called opened the door for Max to take the lead and go on to win his 7th race of the year and take 2nd position in the title fight. This meant it came down to the final race in Abu Dhabi. Lando just had to finish in the top 3 to secure his first World Drivers' Championship title. He did just that, finishing 3rd, and was crowned the champion, the 35th driver to receive the title. It was a fascinating season, with McLaren the standout team and Williams the big improver. Ferrari, they were hapless. Alpine, dead last. Still, with the new regulations coming into effect next year, it's anyone's guess as to who'll be vying for the Constructors' Championship. Earlier this year, I picked Ferrari as the championship team, Alpine 5th and Williams in 9th. Miles off. But I did have 2 to 4 in the correct order, although 1 place lower than they finished. Now, before you go, could you please hit the like button? And for those unsubscribed, I invite you to hit this button. And a reminder too that my end-of-year books are now on sale. If you go to the shop at kimillman.com or click the link below, you'll be able to order yours. And they're sent almost anywhere in the world. Thanks for watching, and stay passionate. 1, 2, 3, 4. Why aren't I seeing that on screen? Now I am. There we go.